Welcome to Loop TV. I'm Gene. This is Doug. Our two topics today are Tesla FSD price increase and also lessons from Theranos. But before we do that, it is appropriate to mark the moment. Today is the 15th anniversary of the debut of the iPhone, not when it actually became available. This is when Steve Jobs displayed it at the Macworld conference, I believe it was. And wow, what a difference 15 years makes. Kind of one of the sub pieces today, I think, is impact. It's hard not to do a Loop TV episode or talk anything tech related and not have some influence from the smartphone. And thank you, Steve Jobs. A salute to you.
Did you get one on the first day, by the way, Gene?
I
This
did.
wasn't the launch day, but yeah.
I think it was in June, the following June, and yeah, I remember I was at the New York store, picked it up there, and then I remember flying back. I was trying to save the company money. Was on a layover from New York to Minneapolis, layover in O'Hare, and I remember listening to music on it and kind of looking around and just thinking, wow, if all the people around here knew what was in my hand, if they only knew. And it's kind of one of those moments where you know things are changing. It's probably a good segue into transformation of full self driving. Andrew and I recently had the privilege of getting a ride in a Tesla that was beta in FSD. I had some similar feelings about that when I was, despite its shortcomings, if you look at it in its aggregate, what FSD was doing, what it's currently doing, I had kind of the same feeling like this is going to change everything. And so to the news is that Tesla announced on January 17th that they're going to be raising the price of FSD. This is if you purchase it up front from 10 to 12,000. Back in November of 2020, so just over a year ago, they raised it from 8 to 10. So we're going from 10 to 12 in about a week, and the no changes to the 199 monthly, but Musk hinted that that would likely be going up. That would be going up as soon as we get closer to full release. As a quick aside, some of the other data that I've seen out there is that adoption for FSD at the time of purchase is running just above 10%. It's still pretty lean. And turn it over to you, Doug. What was your reaction to the news?
Not surprising, I would say. It doesn't feel like something that should come as a shock. They've already raised the price once. And I think right now, when you think about product launches, I mean, this is sort of still a niche product. Not a lot of people are using it, to your point, 10% kind of attach rate here. And so I think early adopters usually are willing to pay higher prices. The thing that kind of stuck with me, though, is I think about the longer term future of full self-driving. Tesla and even beyond Tesla, every OEM will bring it to their vehicles eventually. My gut is kind of that, this $199, $249 price point per month, if you think about it as a subscription, is probably too high. I think it needs to come down to really be a mass market adoption kind of product.
Agree. It's a pretty big number. There's got to be a lot of value for it to justify that. But my belief it's not going to be a consumer decision. Ultimately, is that just like airbags, I think that FSD autonomy is going to be mandated. And if I can just kind of go back in history, is that airbags were mandated in the U.S. in 1998. In 2006, so no one had a choice whether or not to have an airbag in your car. It didn't change the driving experience of it, but so there is a important distinction there. But that was mandated, and then deaths in the U.S. on the roads continued to increase up till about 2006, where they peaked at just over 42,000, and then they declined to call it 2011, 2012, and started to grow again, likely because of distracted driving as smartphone adoption increased. And then you have and it was growing at kind of this 1 to 3% per year. But then in the past couple of years, it's really spiked up, and it's likely going to end 2021. I haven't seen the final data, but likely up 18%. compared to 2020. I mean, just a massive spike. 20 was up over 19 too. It wasn't like a pandemic. Everyone just kind of stayed home. And my takeaway is that, I mean, these are really big numbers. And I guess you could, I'd just bring it back to you, Doug, is I think you're exactly right that eventually this just gets kind of taken into the overall price of a car, the FSD piece. But why isn't this something that it just becomes eventually mandated?
Well, I think it's simple to me. I mean, no one pays a $249 per month subscription for their airbags. I think it's that simple. And I agree with you. Maybe it is eventually mandated. I think there's.
But by the way, people do pay for. They don't pay.
How much do you think an airbag costs though in a car? What do you pay for it? $100?
I don't know.
That's a big difference.
Probably more than $100, but it's still. I understand your point, but you are paying for it, and they're not going to itemize it out in your thing. Like they don't itemize out airbags. They're not going to itemize out FSD on the sticker, and it's just going to be part of the price of the car.
That may be. Then you could say, okay, then maybe the price of cars goes up 10% or something, has a
Probably
spike
does.
when it gets mandated. If it gets mandated, I think that's the thing that I would disagree with you on. Is right now we're having a national debate about all types of different freedoms, and this falls into that category. I don't think there's probably a very large number of people who would say, I don't feel that the government should tell me that I have to let a robot drive me around. And so it may come eventually to the point where we get this thing mandated, but an airbag is different than saying a robot has to drive you. I think that is fundamentally a different thing. An airbag's easy. Everybody should want an airbag. That's easy. And so I think my point in making that argument is, if we think this is going to get mandated in 5 years or 10 years, I think you're crazy. I think it's going to take more than a decade before full self-driving is a government mandate, if it ever happens. That would be my argument.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be a long road to get there because of all the political background that you appropriately framed in. I'm curious, what do you? We've talked to people about autonomy for years since we started Loop, and a common response that we'll hear from people is, "I love to drive. I'm never going to give up driving." And a common response to that from me is, people used to love to ride horses, and you can still go and ride horses. You can go to horse trails and do that. And I suspect that back around the turn of the century, the 19th century, I bet that there was a lot of people who were frustrated that it was, at one point it became illegal. You can't take a horse down an interstate today.
Actually, not an interstate, but I do live near Amish country, where horses and buggies still ride on the road. Just so you know, it does still exist.
It does.
And by the way, I want to build on that point. That's what it really comes down to me, which is the Amish still have the freedom to say, I don't want to own an automobile. I want to use horses for my mode of transportation. And that's what it all comes down to me. I think that over time, it may very well prove true that a large portion of the population wants to, kind of under their own volition, use autonomy, right, if it's a product they really love. We talk about the iPhone, right? And it was a slow adoption curve. You knew out of the gate when you had an iPhone that it was going to transform the world, but it still took years and years and years for everybody to actually get up to the speed and get a smartphone. And I think that you think about the ramp for self-driving, I think it's an even much longer ramp. Sure. And to me, it comes down to, you got to let the consumer choose. Even with the horse and buggy, I mean, the Amish, to me, is the point there. There still are people making that choice.
Fair. And I think we're basically on the same page. It's going to take time. I think eventually it gets there. Maybe it's a coin toss, but we're not going to have it mandated. I don't think it's going to be mandated in the next 3 years. That's for sure. One last question before we go to Theranos. The motivation, what's the motivation, do you think, for raising the price from 10 to 12 grand? If adoption is, let's call it 10%, why even raise it?
I think maybe they're trying to figure out what is the market willing to pay. I think that often when you have a new product like this, you can do tests, because raising the price, cutting the price, right, it doesn't really affect that much, because it's not a huge portion of your customer base that you're affecting. And so to me, I think it's a perfect time for them to be testing different price points and see, does this really affect uptake at all if we boost it a little bit? And I wouldn't be surprised, like I said, I think the price is actually going to go lower over the long term. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe we get one more raise and then maybe we start to see it go lower as some competing services come to market.
That's my sense too. I think they're just kind of experimenting with the price elasticity of this. I don't think it's, this is not a product that's 80% adopted and they're getting a clear indication from consumers that they can raise the price. I think they're experimenting and to see where this goes, and why not? Because there's going to be a pretty loyal tech forward type of person that's going to pay for it. So looking forward to all the updates. We'll be continuing to test those as FSD rolls out. Not sure what Musk is saying in terms of timing of when it's going to be mainstream. As a reminder, you take whatever he says, you add somewhere between 1 and 2 years and you get the right answer. He's rarely right on time.
By the way, real quick, I think he mentioned level 4 this summer. I think I saw recently, 2022.
Okay, so then you put it through that. So somewhere 23 or 2024. As a reminder, Musk is really right on timing, but he does get it right long term. I mean, if he says he's going to be first and early on it, I would be in his camp, be betting that he's accurate on that, whether it's 22, 23, or 24. We're going to jump to the next topic in terms of Theranos. Of course, there's this view now, or it raises the question around fake it till you make it. And just some context is Loop, Loop 2, our current fund, we invest in both private and public companies in that. And so we're very in tune to what's going on in the private market. So this is a topic for us. And a lot of times when we're talking with companies, we'll start the conversation by saying something like, okay, just tell us, we'll just start, we don't care about your deck. Just tell us the bad news, tell us what we need to know. We don't want to get our shovels out and try to excavate bad news. Please just let us know. And then we ask that question, and I think we probably rarely actually get the right answer about what's going on, because the fake it till you make it mentality. And I guess my question is, how prevalent is fake it till you make it, we'll say, with companies that are sub $1 billion in enterprise value?
It's, I think, fairly common, I would say. I think it's almost necessary. And there are extremes to it, though. What Elizabeth Holmes did was well beyond fake it till you make it. I mean, it was legitimate fraud. But I do think that, oftentimes when you are developing breakthrough technology, you have to convince people to believe in you. You have to convince people to work with you. You have to convince people to buy it. You have to convince investors that you can do it. And sometimes that runs into gray areas. And, it's funny, like the success stories you often don't hear about, or you might even regale in the tales of, minor lies that they may be told along the way to get a customer, to convince an employee, whatever it is. So I actually think, the degree matters in terms of what is fake it till you make it.
Let me ask a specific one. A common one that we run into is our potential investments, or company that we're interviewing, I should say, is maybe elevating how close they are to getting a customer, saying they're right around the corner. They may even say that they are signed, or where is the line there? If they say that they're signed and they're not signed, that obviously would be unacceptable.
Yeah, exactly.
But let's say they have one conversation with Amazon, and all of a sudden they start embellishing the potential around Amazon. Is that okay to an investor?
Well, let's use an example we were just talking about, Elon. You just said you have to add a year or two to everything Elon says. And so, that's an example of him embellishing how quickly things are going to happen. It's not that they're not getting there. It's not that they're not making progress, but the timelines that he ascribes are often.
Right. I think in the case of Elon, though, I think he's actually going to get there. The example that I'm giving is a company that says that they're going to do a deal with Amazon, and it may be just a friend of a friend who works at Amazon they did a call there. So yes, there was a call, but there's no chance they're ever actually going to get, I think that Elon eventually is going to get to FSD, full self-driving.
I do too. And I think there's Elon haters who would say that what he does is egregious. I don't agree with that. I don't think it's egregious. I think he's being, an aggressive salesman. I think he's kind of pushing the future forward. as part of what he does. I think he has to sell aggressively. So, everybody wants to make things black and white. And I fundamentally have a problem with that. It's not 0 or 1. It's not binary. We talked about quantum, I think a week or two ago. I think oftentimes when you're talking about the fake it till you make it thing, it is superposition. It's 0 and 1. You have to live in a gray area. And so I can't give you a specific example. Everything's case dependent is kind of my answer.
Mhm.
I think fraud when you see it. I always come back to that great quote by Justice, who was it? Potter Stewart, I believe it was, who said, "I know pornography when I see it."
Mhm.
And I think the same thing applies here. I know when I see it, when it's too far in terms of the fake it till you make it.
I think I think it is more black and white than that. I think that when you talk to a company, it'd be fine for them just to say, we had one call with Amazon. It was early. It may or may not go any place, but we're hopeful. And I mean, I feel like this is how we operate. We always lead with bad news and with good news and value transparency. And I don't see why other companies can't do it. And we're 5 years old.
But let me challenge you there, because let's talk about Elon again. He has said things were going to happen on timelines that were way too aggressive. So how do you put that in there?
This is what I would say is
like the same thing.
I think that there's I guess an ethics compass here. Like, what does Elon really believe would be my question. And if he knows it's 2024, then I have a problem with him saying that it's summer 22. But if he and there's this question too around, in order to get to 2023, you got to say to your team, I want it in 2022 to get them moving hard, to have that deadline out there. It's quite it's three-dimensional chess, what some of these founders and people like Elon have to do. But I guess as an investor, I think you have to, on the private side, it's different than the public side. He's trying to I think, navigate a different set of equations. There's also suppliers who you're working, he's trying to send messages to them. And I would say at the end of the day, even if that was his mentality of, yep, I really think it's 2023, but I got to say 22 just to keep everybody motivated to get there, to get it as soon as possible. I'm not okay with that. I would rather him just say 2023 and then go and do what he needs to do to get his teams and his suppliers in line. And I just think it's a courtesy. And I understand it's out there, and we have a pretty heavy filter. Even though we lead those conversations with tell us the bad news, we know we're not getting the bad news. We know we're not hearing it all. And I just, I guess Theranos is 2 standard deviations in the negative category. But I think there's still a culture in startup world that I wish it was more aligned. And I actually think it'd be easier for them to win investors if they just said, hey, this is how we're really feeling about this. We feel good about this. We've got challenges here. And I think most investors would take more of a partnership mentality than to juice things up and then come back a year later with disappointing news.
I think in some cases, here's what I would come back to. Number one, I do think there's a gray area, and it is a subjective thing. And to your point, it's also subjective to the investor. I think some investors are probably more okay with aggressive sales than others, and it probably depends on where they come from and how they think about the world. But at the end of the day, I think for us in particular, and really for every investor who doesn't want to get run over, you want to invest in people that you think have high integrity.
Right, you trust them.
And just because somebody's an aggressive salesperson doesn't mean they don't have high integrity. Just because maybe they embellish a little bit about where they're at with Amazon, let's say, to a fair degree, I think that someone can still have integrity and try to be, setting stones, like you just said with Elon, with the team, like, we got to get this Amazon contract closed. We're close. Let's keep driving forward, get the product ready.
I think we're largely on the same page. I do think you win by being transparent. Transparency wins. It's one of our core values, transparency. So I'm going to always go back to that. I'm sure there will be other Theranoses despite this conversation. And we'll be talking about, it'll take probably 3-4 years for us to talk about it, because it's got to go through a lot of courts and whatnot. But always a windy road in both startup and on the public side, like private, public. Anything more to add, Doug? I think we're a wrap for now.
That's it from me.
Awesome. On behalf of Doug, Gene, and Loop TV, bye for now.